Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. Tonight, Svan and I are going to start, and we'll see how far we make it. It's a little bit different. Sometimes the lore is broke up differently, and the Have 'em All, which we did 7 parts of, is really meaty with experiential things. So I'm not sure how it's going to go tonight as far as length. Like I said, we'll see how far we make it. But tonight we're starting the Vafþrúðnismál. To get us started, just so everybody knows, so everybody is on the same page, Nick, if you could put the link in there. As per usual, we're going to be using the Bellows translation. That's handy dandy and easy to look at on your phone, on your computer, whatever you're consuming this on, if you want to follow along. But also, as usual, we highly encourage you to use what you like, and if you've got something you prefer, a different translation, you want to see how they do things, I think that's a great idea. So not sure how it worked out. I haven't gotten a whole lot of feedback yet, but as of last week, when we come out on podcasting on Fridays, we should be on lots of different stuff. So Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of those things. We should also, right now, are currently live on Entropy, VK, Odyssey, Twitch, Twitter, Rumble, and right here on YouTube. Please feel free to ask any questions you'd like. If they're relevant to the text that we're going over, we'll stop and we will, answer them as they come up. If not, we will hold off till the end of the program, but I promise we will get to your questions. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you want to contribute, if you'd like to donate, you can do that over on Entropy, or you can do that in any of a number of ways that are in the description of this video. We appreciate all those things. Your guys' generosity makes a huge difference and is much appreciated. And we're starting off the show with a really special donor that always comes through for us, that's always out in front helping. Starting off, Ronald Blake donates $100 for the Stone family, which is a family that we're running a charitable drive right now to help out with some legal fees. And also Ronald is he bought us 3 coffees. Says, "Hail all." Well, hail to you, Ronald, and
hail
thank
to
you
you
very much. Hail the givers. We appreciate you guys more than you know. Trying to think if there's anything else off the top. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge today is our day of remembrance for Mr. John Yule, better known as Stubba, a pioneer in the early days of modern Asatru that helped get us on course to where we're at today, and somebody that was very seminal in making this happen that we all enjoy. So we celebrate him today on his day of remembrance. Without further ado, I think that's where we're at, and we're kind of ready to dive in. First, Svan, is there anything you'd like to tell folks about this poem itself? Any kind of background, anything you think folks might need to be aware of before we go into it?
Yeah, I definitely think that one thing that to give context to what we're doing is, or just to help kind of roadmap the stories, there are encyclopedia poems, and there are 3 of them that everyone should be familiar with or want to be familiar with if you're trying to kind of codex the entirety of I guess the support structures of the faith. As far as from a poetic standpoint, of course, it gives us kind of a checklist, and its original purpose was for the skald, the keeper of the stories, the keeper of the poems, and the keeper of the lore, to have kind of an idea, a roadmap, and a mental checklist, as well as a verbal kind of arsenal when they were preparing and creating poems. And there's 3 of them, and this is the first one. So it's in essence a battle of wits, and we find ourselves like kind of in the middle of questioning and answering that are ultimately a gain of, or a way to pass down tradition and a way to pass down again knowledge. Whether it's, this one might not necessarily have been geared towards people in a hall, or a family, if you will, maybe sections of it, particularly maybe because of their beauty or the way that it sounded, but it wasn't in its entirety geared towards an audience. It was actually geared towards other skalds or other shopes or other bards, or whatever word you want to use it, to fill that spot in. And so you have Vafþrúðnismál is the first one. Then you have Grimnismál, which is the second one. And then you have Alvismál, which is the third one. And that's 2 of them are, of course, involving Lord Odin. And the third one, interestingly and fun enough, again, because a lot of people fail to admit this, that the Stormfather, Lord Thor, is also wise and very all-knowing. And so he is also involved in one of these kind of encyclopedia back and forth question and answer form of poems. So this is the first one of 3 that I really think, I mean, we're most likely, we're going to cover them, but I wanted to, give people an idea as to what's going on. And there's some stipulation about the beginning of this poem. The survivability of it in relation to it being written down in notes elsewhere. The first part of this poem is a little, again, kind of, it doesn't substantiate well, or it may have been added in later because of a loss of the beginning. And so we find like they supported it later on with this introduction between Lord Odin and Lady Frigga. And then from there, they move into the poem pretty swiftly. Another thing that's worth noting, and I don't know if the numbers are significant, but it seems almost that Vafþrúðnir, he only really gives 4 questions out, and then the rest Lord Odin gives in return, and comes out with quite a bit. So this really ends up becoming a kind of a questioning on Vafþrúðnir, more so than on Lord Odin, in an interesting way. I don't know if that was done on purpose, or how it was exactly compiled, or the reasonings behind that. But I think that's very interesting that Lord Odin like stands for 4, and then he gets to question the rest. And the battery of questions in which he gives are aggressive, and may have continuity to his name, the Haiti that he has in the poem. As a, again, he's not, it might be a play on words. He's not giving counsel, he's gaining counsel, and he's gaining counsel by asking questions. And that, of course, pertains to the Haiti, but we'll get into that later. So right out the gate, this is a story about Lord Odin telling Lady Frigga that he wants to go and test his wits against this mighty poet, this mighty riddler, this mighty lore crunching Jotun who everyone knows is extremely powerful. And she already kind of knows where he's going. And he does, test himself. I have seen some stories in which they take the poems and convert them back into stories. And they always seem to add an element of death to this, the idea that perhaps they're betting or wagering their heads. And I see this kind of repeated through. And so I know it's in, I know it sounds bad, but I guess being honest is being honest. I know it's in one of the stories, but it seems to be that they apply it to a lot of them. So then I end up losing which one actually has it and which one they just seem to add to. It caused a little bit of confusion for me when I was younger, because I always just ended up kind of thinking that it was always like to the death. Clearly with Vafþrúðnismál, there is a dire consequence with getting into riddles with Lord Thor. So, but that's another time. So just to prep that and get that into everyone's mindset, this is a sit down between an ancient Jotun and Lord Odin, and their contextualizing of everything with the express purpose that the person learning this poem is supposed to know these and have them as a mental checklist, so that when they create poetry, they can fall back on the traditional words and the traditional sets. And it was one of the best ways, I think, that Snorri kept our faith alive, and also that I think there are great secrets hidden within more, I would say, esoteric or just deeply hidden, perhaps the gods within the intent of us finding and exerting these secrets later do reside in this poem.
All right. Well, with that, would you like to go ahead and get folks started on Vafþrúðnismál 1?
Yeah. So Vafþrúðnir, just to explain it, because I know it's going to catch people up on the tongue every time we do it. Vaf by itself means to, it's the same as in the English word weft, when sewing, when weaving. It also means to wrap or to wind tightly. And so Thrúðnir, of course, is kind of strong, but strong in word. So the strong riddles or the strong song, strong poet, the one who weaves words tightly. And I find that interesting too, considering if you ever look up the origin of the word Vörðlokur and how it may have parallels to the word warlock in English. I know warlock ended up kind of popping up later on in the Middle Ages, but it has come from somewhere, and it has a kind of a parallel to the word locking, which is an interesting perspective of another kind of unknown telling of magics within our ancestors. But here it seems to be, again, the idea is that to be able to twist words, wrap words, tighten words, or use words to bind, all have a great strength. So weave riddler is kind of, or wrapping, I don't want to say wrapping riddler because that has context different nowadays, but it's the weaving riddler is kind of his name. So Odin quoth, or Odin quotes, or Odin quoth Odin. It's basically Odin spake. 1. Counsel me, Frigg, for I long to fare, and Vafþrúðnir fain would find fit wisdom, old with the giant wise. Myself would I seek to match. So right out the gate, it's stating, and again, this beginning may have been substantiated in order to link into the poem itself, and that the front half of this poem may have had some problems, especially with the actual losing of a piece of the parchment. So right out the gate, it starts off with a dialogue, and he's basically saying, you know, I would fain would find, I would like to go out and with joy go out and find this old giant who is apparently of high renown and match myself against him and see where I stand. Do you want me to, like, because I don't know if we want to stop at each one or kind of
No, let's go ahead and keep going until we have
kind of more of a base.
Yeah, I'll throw stuff in there if I think, you know, if I need to, and if we stop, just kind of if you give a little pause after each stanza just in case. But no, I think we're good.
Well, here it says, you know, Frigg kvað, quoth Frigg, Herr father, here at home I would keep. And it's interesting, she speaks of him as Herjar father, the father of battle. Here at home I would keep, where the gods together dwell, amid all the giants and equal in might. To Vafþrúðnir know I none. And this, of course, sets up this is the rise of the roller coaster before the drop. Because it's one thing to have everyone have this, you know, this guy is, this Jotun is all powerful. But then it's another thing when your wife says, there's no one that matches him. Like, you should not do this. Which is, of course, gonna make it even more so. So it's definitely the pull back on the slingshot. And I think it's a methodology that works, and it shows a kind of I think a relationship dynamic that it's still pertinent today, but shows that it was pertinent then, with the idea that Lord Odin and Lady Frigga are having this kind of husband-wife conversation, and he wants to test himself on something, and she kind of winds him up even more, maybe intentionally, maybe not intentionally, who knows. I would say probably unintentionally as it's kind of set up, but you know it's going to happen because it has to. No one, you know, is of the same I can't, like, so the word they use here is yarvnar. Yarvnar is like consumptive, or the person who knows, he's so hungry for knowledge, like no one can match him. And so she
go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say kind of a side note on this passage, not really relevant to the poem, but any of you guys that have been in one of our Odin bloats may recognize the title Herjafather. I'm trying to think of another instance of its use because it's not one of the frequently used ones, but just here's kind of an example of that. If you ever heard, we have a chant during that bloat that we do called the Herjafather chant. And this is an instance in the lore of that term being used.
Yeah, and the translation of that is very confusing for an English speaker because it survives in the English language in a very odd place. If you were to say the Vikings harried the coast of Scotland, that meant that they raided and attacked. You could say that the wolf pack harried the caribou, and that means that they're just kind of swiping in one by one over and over and over again. But it also means to has a kind of a denotion to flying or to raising up, like with the Harrier airplane in the Marine Corps, or like the Falcon. And so there's a connection there between flying and also attacking. So you'll see these kind of translations where it's like it means the raiding father. And I think that it also has connections, of course, to Herr, or a warrior, same as in German, Hermann, kind of a member of the army. So you find this like convoluted basically people just trying to pick what they feel might have better context for the moment. But in general, it means, battle or attacking father, the father of assault, if you will. And I think that fits better in the idea that we should think of that battle as that again, that rushing forward.
Proceed.
Okay, so in the third stanza, and again it says, and you can see these parts again, Odin Kvaf, quote, Odin, much have I fared, much have I found, much have I got from the gods, and fain would I know how Vafþrúðnir now lives in his lofty hall. So he's seeking the joy of knowing, where his established knowledge, where his renown is coming from. Again, just another Rhea testament, but it is interesting too that much have I got from the gods, and this is an important thing. I think that you and I, Alcirgo, were talking about this like a little while ago, and when I read this, it clicked in again. A lot of people have this concept that, like, in the stories, if Heimdall gives the runes, it can't be Heimdall; it has to be Odin. That the idea that the gods interconnect and create a strata. There is a hierarchy, but I think that there's a heavy dependence on kind of this either monotheistic thought, or like, again, I see it in Hinduism where they're kind of combining everything into one Shiva or one Vishnu, and there cannot be but interpolations or kind of fragments or facets or whatever. But here, Lord Odin says, I learn much from the gods. I've learned from my folk, the heavenly folk. I've learned all the wisdom that I can, and I want to go out and seek outside of in the outer guard, the renown that this, supposed, weaving riddler has gained for himself. And I find that very interesting because a lot of people don't think of the gods as they have to physically be kind of amalgamated into one, because they're not truly hard polytheistic. They see and kind of jam the gods into one thing, if you will, and that anything outside of that is just story fluff to them. And I think it's this line here really does speak of the gods as being very powerful beings, but that they do find strength and betterment by connecting and working together, as opposed to just simply being a story piece of what I guess is like veiled monotheism in a lot of ways. So I really like that part. So Lady Frigg relents in stanza 4. She says, now in the stanza in the Old Norse, you'll see the word hail, and we were talking about that the other with hail and hailsa and helu. This really is the usage of the word, not saying hello, but saying whole, well, come back whole. So safest or safe mayest thou go, safe come again. So hail thu farir means wholly or wellly shall you go. Hail thu afterkomer, afterwards come back whole. And I really love that saying, that line. I've seen it translated in many different ways, but whole shall you go and whole shall you return. And I really love the fact that he used some older English words here with safe mayest thou go, safe come again, and safe be thy way thou wendest. That is a word that I use in one of my prayers. Wendest meaning, of course, to go about or to go around or to travel about something. Father of men, let thy mind be keen when speech with the giant thou seekest. And that part there, Eði verdui, hvar þú skalt allfather, orðum, words that are spoken, Maila Jotun, the giant, as and again, remember, whenever you see the word Jotun, don't think of giant per se as think of giant and Jotun meaning an ancient being, one that has been since either Mospelli, Niflhel, or the slaying of Ymir.
A quick just point of I don't know, association and kind of a callback to our have them all. I think it was the last time we spoke. We went over the rune song that describes it very similar on the Sig rune or the victory rune, about sending your comrades out to battle whole, having them return whole from the field. It's the same kind of poetic alliteration with the same verbiage there, and it really stands out. And I agree. I think it's really beautifully put there.
Yeah, I think if anybody wanted to, if we were talking about the revitalization of certain cultural customs, I mean, we have some that have survived and some that haven't. I know that some people, when they talk about guests, getting a drink for a guest, or these things kind of survive. I definitely could see this as a cultural way of saying goodbye. Is whole you should go and whole you should come back, or well you should go and well you should come back, because again, it's reiterated throughout our lore.
So I think this is a good enough time to bring this up as well. We have lost the direct association with kind of the root concept of health. This extends spiritually, it extends culturally, it extends to lifestyle. The original, way our people conceived of being healthy was being whole, was not missing a piece of yourself. And that wasn't just a physical concept. It's like, yeah, we don't want you to get maimed and come back missing an arm, missing a leg, or damaged physically, but also, missing a part of yourself. One of the biggest things, and our founder, Steve McNallen, put this probably best when he talked about the soul sickness of our folk. That soul sickness is based on us missing a fundamental piece of who we are by rejecting Asatru, by our ancestors rejecting Asatru and embracing Christianity. Our people have been unwhole since then in a spiritual way, and that's caused us great damage. So the concept of living a holistic life, of this faith being all encompassing, and of having all of your parts that make you a whole completed being the key to good health is really fundamental in how we view the world. And it's also fundamental in our view of justice. In other faiths, the only person who is wronged by an injustice is their God. And so that's the only power they need to make it right by. In our faith, it's very different. If you injure someone or damage them, steal their property, or in a less obvious way, in situations of honor or I mean, we'll see this in this day and age with something like libel or defamation. If you take away a piece of someone's reputation, if you take away some of their standing or some of their fame, or if you take something from them, that was the point of justice to our ancestors. It's why the vengeance culture arose that did, was they needed to extract an equal amount of whatever you took, or the closest equivalent they could get, to become whole again. And until they did, they were missing a piece of themselves. They're missing a piece of their luck. They're missing a piece of their fame, a piece of who they are. And sometimes that's survived in legalese to this day, when we talk about, compensation for something, and what's it going to take to make you whole? What's it going to take to make this party whole? So the idea is, what's going to refill what was taken? And so that's very much a concept from our ancestors and our people. And it's fundamental to that expression, when we refer to that as health. And it's important to realize it's got spiritual and social implications, and not just physical ones.
I think it also lends to the idea that Asatru as a faith is naturally folkish and naturally ancestral or foundationally based. I wouldn't say past based, but that we look at that which came before us as a medium of foundation, and that we should add on to it, not take away, but also maintain it. And that the dissolvement, the dissolution of something, the breaking of something is not to be done unless under great consideration, because we don't want to be the cause of that which makes something unwhole. And that's how our traditions are formulated years over years of gift giving, and the way that our gift cycle is done. These considerations aren't just willy-nilly, laid about, because they're whole and they have function. They grow better, they grow stronger, and they innovate, but they are based off of that core way of thinking. And I think that the same with our people, the same with the kind of our laws, the way of our lands. I know that our ancestors were very apt to go into the lands of other folk and, be there and experience, or even, and give praise to certain folk in other lands for what they have and what they've done, and perhaps think, we should have that as well. Speaking of like the Vikings, when the Vikinger that went into like Arabia, and they saw the southern Persian kingdoms, and they were like, wow, these guys are doing great. They've got lots of money. They've got lots of lands. They've got their stuff figured out. This is phenomenal. And so they definitely give praise for things that they consider good, but it's very rarely at the sacrifice of what was from before. They're not just going to throw everything in the bin, their ancestors, the traditions that were, built there. And I mean, that happens with Christianity over and over and over again. We see that. But it also kind of reemphasizes a lot of that point of Asatru as being returning to whole, as opposed to you see nowadays in modern age, where people are just kind of glorifying the pieces, if you will.
All right. And what verse are we on next, in case people are following along?
Okay, let's see here. Let me see. We are on number 5.
All right.
Now, this is an interesting one, and so I was looking into this more, and again, it might be a spelling error. And I would definitely say, for those watching tonight, put a question mark around this and look into it, because there are some people that have gone in a direction towards perhaps an Ausenjur, but I don't know if that's 100%. But in this stanza here, the wisdom then of the giant wise, forth did he fare to try, He found the hall of the father of Im, and in forthwith went Ig. So this is interesting because they're speaking about Vafþrúðnir as being the father of Im. Ims is what it says. There's no knowing as to what this this correlates to. Perhaps another story that was lost or was never written down. Some have tried to say that this Jotun is the father of an Ausynjur because of other references somewhere else, but the word is not it. The name of that Ausynjur, which eludes me right now, is longer than Ims, and so they have tried to say that they are one and the same. I don't 100% take to that. I think that Snorri, some of the fragments and things that he did was either, again, as simple as misspellings or connections to other stories that were never written down, and we'll never know. But this is, of course, Im's father is Vafþrúðnir, and in forth went Ig. Now, this is another interesting part. We know who Ig is. Ig is Lord Odin. Ig means awesome or terrifyingly awesome or with a sense of awe that is kind of scary. And I find it truly interesting because we clearly see that Lord Odin is spoken of as Lord Odin, and then he has his Heiti set. But this kind of shot sends a warning to the audience or a warning to the poet that he's going in there like an atom bomb. And in a way he kind of does, because Vafþrúðnir shoots out 4 questions and then the rest is Lord Odin just kind of tidal waving him. And I never realized that until I kind of was going through this again. And I was like, maybe that's that Ig titling, which of course is everyone's familiar with Yggdrasil, is kind of a foreboding sense of what's coming. But here it says, that the wisdom then of the giant wise, forth did he fare to try. He went out, Lord Odin, and in the old Norse stanza, it says that Lord Odin went to speak with this all-wise Jotun. And inside, the terrible one walked in. And that's kind of the intro of what, setting the stage, if you will.
Oh, a note on Ym. From what I can find, is the meaning is like dust or soot, or in Norwegian it comes down to us to mean smell. So I don't know that adds anything of value, but just to put it out there. Sometimes, especially in the poems that are intended for the skalds, when there's minor characters, their name and its meaning is very significant.
Yeah, the double J too is a linguistic thing that's kind of it ends up being like a GK sound, like yeek. Like if people might be familiar with Olaf Tryggvason, that the double G in his is a kind of a GK sound. Oh, you meant Im. Sorry. Im. Sorry, I was still wrapped up on eek. Yeah, I don't know. Again, that's interesting, because one of the things that I think a lot of people need to tackle with is that Snorri wrote a lot about the Jotuns, as I think it was kind of like, I always joke when I do some of my classes, the guy that does the slap on tape, I forgot the name of that guy, but it's kind of like when Snorri wasn't quite sure slap Jotun on it. And Jotun just means really ancient being of that consumptive origin. And so the Jotuns have a tendency to be primordial, avatars of nature, but they can also be conceptual. And oftentimes I think are conceptual for the sake of the story. The wisdom that needs to be passed down has a functional purpose to be played upon, whether it was a Jotun or a Dvergar or Svartalfar or a dwarf. These functions have purpose. And there may not be an as easy connection to the primordial forces as there are with other Jotun. And there's also a lot of confusion, again, about descendancy from Ymir, descendancy from Muspelheim, and descendancy from Nibelheim, and how these three sources are the sources of the Jotuns. And we don't quite know because they're never really specified. But we move into stanza 6. And again, the stanzas are neatly ordered and brought together. Oftentimes you won't, if there's a double stanza of speaking, that's because of the meter had to be met. And if that meter is overdone, then they'll do another kind of a double stanza. But stanza number 6, Odin spake, Vafþrúðnir hail, to thy hall am I come. For thyself I fain would see, and first would I ask, if wise thou art, or giant, all wisdom hast won. So it's worded a little funny. I think Bellows is, again, utilizing verbiage that kind of double ins on itself. And first would I ask, if wise thou art, or giant, all wisdom hast won. I think, and this is more or less lending to the ideas that have you earned your wisdom would be the better way of like kind of conceptualizing that last line, if it confuses you at all. It confuses me. So
yeah, he's basically issuing a challenge. He's saying, I'm here to find out whether you know stuff. Like, are you wise, or and it's so we spoke certainly in the Havamal about hall culture being fundamental to how our ancestors conceived of the world around them. And this is that idea of going into someone else's hall and laying down a challenge. This contest didn't have to happen if he would have been like, no, I don't know anything, I'm dumb. Okay, cool, you're forfeiting and a win, and there's no problem. But the concept of formally issuing a challenge and having the challenge accepted and going into a test of luck, a test of wits, a test of knowledge, of scaldsmanship, or of arms was, a very common, certainly a common literary motif and a common behavior of heroes.
And it's met with an equal sense of like disdain or kind of like there's an immediate posturing on both sides that becomes very prevalent very quickly, as I think they also, Vafþrúðnir needs to be established as someone worthy of Lord Odin's, attention. He's not just some nobody. He's gonna bring it, and he brings it right away. It's kind of funny because of the way that it's written in the Old Norse versus the way Bellows wrote it. Bellows is a lot more polite, I guess, but he says, Vafþrúðnir, the weaving riddler speaks. Who is this man that speaks to me here in my lofty hall? Forth from our dwelling thou never shall fare, unless wiser than I thou art. So it's very funny because if you look over in the Old Norse, the word verpump means to like toss or throw, or in essence, he's like, who's spitting these words at me? He was like, who comes into my hall just chucking words at me with without knowing, who I am. So I find it funny. He's like, so this guy's over here spitting, and he just says, rarely do I ever fare out, to challenge others unless, I am wiser than them. So you best be wiser than me to be kind of in here.
And, not to belabor it, but this is, again, a test of your luck and your reputation. Either of these two parties could have, no, I'm not wise at all. I'm just a giant dude that's got a haul, sit down and have something to eat. And again, when he throws it back at Odin could have been like, I'm nobody. I was just curious, no big deal. And again, not taking the bait. These opportunities to the challenge, though, it's something that you see amongst men in different forms to this day. And it just reminds me of a confusing occurrence. So one time when I was bouncing in Florida, I was right across the street from the Castillo de San Marco. And it's this old, this ancient for this continent Spanish fort. And it's really cool. And so St. Augustine, it was in St. Augustine, Florida, and it's, the oldest city in the United States. And this gentleman of color was denied entrance to my establishment. And he kept like puffing his chest out at me like, you strong? You think you strong? What? You strong? And I'm, I kind of shrugged my shoulders. I'm like, strong enough. And he's like, then he pointed over at the fort. He says, Ponce de Leon, what? You ain't as strong as him. And took off down the road. So take that for what it is. But, perhaps on the other side of the veil, me and Ponce got something we got to work out. I don't know.
That is awesome. Honor to Ponce de Leon right there. Even in the random of sense. So I think it's more akin to like, look, a unicorn, and then he kind of goes off in another direction.
Yeah, strange things happen. But I don't want to take away from the story. But while I have already distracted, I will acknowledge Dean bought us 5 coffees. That's a $25 value. My wife and I joined the AFA today. We are excited to get to know you all. That is fantastic. I think I just sent you guys welcome letters a few minutes back, right before the program. We are very excited to have you guys, and I'm really excited that you're listening to Victory Never Sleeps this evening, and that you thought to be generous to us and to donate. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. This learning about so many people listening to VNS and kind of getting a chance to hear and have us go over lore and things like that, and really brings them in to learn more. This is amazing. This is again a testament to what's going on here and how well it's reaching people. And I think other people are out there sharing and getting it out there. It's getting out into their feed, and so definitely like these videos and share, and get your friends to watch so they can hear it from us. All
right. Well, take us. A challenge has been hinted at.
It's been dropped.
Take us into it.
Okay, so in this part, in verse 8, what you will normally see is a lot of people will say Gagan or Gaganrath. That is not incorrect, because those are the letters that we use in English, but it is incorrect in relation to, and it kind of stands in the way of understanding or again, building a connection to the names of the gods, and especially the Haiti that are often used. So just remember, if you ever see a G in the middle of a word and it's not doubled, it has a tendency to be a softer, almost GY sound, and oftentimes can be completely a Y sound. In this example, even in the English version, if you say gain wrath, because the Old Norse is gain ráður. Gain is the same as in English. Like, what do you have to gain? And ráður is counsel. So he is the gaining counsel. He is the questioner. And again, I think this is another shot across the bow for the poet or the audience to let them know that the great source of the questions that are going to be flowing are going to be coming from the one seeking counsel, the one who's looking to gain. And that is Lord Odin. So gain Rav, or gain Ráður, as in Old Norse. So Gainrav. Gainrav, they call me, and thirsty I come for a journey hard to thy hall. Welcome I look for long have I fared, and gentle greeting, giant, Jotun. So Vafþrúðnir speaks in stanza 9, why standest thou there on the floor? Whilst thou speakest? A seat shall thou have in my hall. Then soon shall we know whose knowledge is more, the guest or the sage's gray. Now, I really find that interesting, the sage's gray, because he says the gamli thulur, and the thulur, as we've spoken before, if any people remember, is again the singer, the poet, the storyteller, and so that kind of substitutes as a sage sometimes here. So take a seat, he says, and we shall find out. And there's still a little bit more talking going on.
It's another important thing this reinforces, and some of these things are just background notes that the original audiences would be super familiar with, but that I think is worth, I don't know, recalibrating ourselves on or refamiliarizing ourselves. Hospitality was an understood and an expected thing. It would be thought very poor of you if someone came into your hall and you didn't offer them a seat and offer them something to drink and sit them down and take care of your guest. That was very fundamental to our ancestors' way of being, and you have to remember that most of the setting of this isn't, in a city. These are halls spread out over farmsteads, over distances that, if you came to somebody's hall, you were traveling often in, unpleasant weather and condition, and, hey, sit down, have a drink, relax, clean yourself up, offering them something to, wipe the road dust off their face and off their hands. Hospitality wasn't expected, even, certainly to one of your friends, but to the random stranger that would come by. And so this is, we see that in the backdrop of this, but that was very much expected, and it would be to your shame if you were thought miserly and inhospitable to guests.
I was just quickly trying to look up something, and of course, I drop a bunch of books. So I'm making noise. Sorry about that. Let's see. So then, from stanza 10, Odin speaks back. If a poor man reaches the home of the rich, let him wisely speak or be still. For him who speaks with the heart of heart will chattering ever work ill. And there's a couple parts to that that are worth looking at. The idea of a traveler or someone being in deficit to the person the hall that he's showing up at. And that's where, if a poor man reaches the home of the rich, is if he comes to someone with bounty and he is at a deficit by travel, it doesn't necessarily mean by economic class. And I think some people might want to hone in on that for certain reasons. But still, it kind of goes in it shows spectrum or hierarchy in the culture then. But it's saying, that if a person is powerful, if a person has lands, if a person has influence, it is best that you speak wisely or don't speak at all and just be grateful for what you receive. Because offending or you never knowing who you, and again, we covered this greatly in the Albemarle. It's important. So I think that one of the biggest things that's worth contexting there is the man who has much versus the man who is at a deficit by the nature of his situation should always either speak wisely and tactfully or just be still and be thankful for what you receive, because you don't know to what level you might be weaving yourself into things in at the time. And the heart of heart part was the one I wanted to just like suddenly look up. Because I think it would be more befitting to say hard tongue, or harsh worded, will eventually weave his own doom, is in essence what that last part of the stanza is saying. Is someone who lacks the ability and the tactfulness and will speak with a hard tongue will end up getting their just desserts if they aren't careful. The same again with like the stanza saying that a chattering tongue will often weave its own undoing. So another kind of tidbit of wisdom.
And I think that the reference to the poor and the rich isn't just economically speaking. It's poor and rich in value, in Heminia, in ability. If you go someplace and you start strutting your stuff and you don't have it, you're in the company of those that do, it's not going to work out well for you. It's kind of a condescending advice to the traveler, like, hey, you don't know where you are. I am the wisest of giants. You're going to come to my hall and, test me on wisdom, you better bring it. And that's kind of the advice there, like, hey, don't come in the presence of your betters and start throwing down challenges, or you may, end up the worse for it.
Yeah, and
and I don't know if we've touched on this enough, but at this point, he's going by an alias and he's in disguise. He hasn't made known who he is. As far as the giant knows, hey, this is just some guy. And, who's this guy coming in my hall and challenging me? And it's very much intentional on the Allfather's part to keep himself under disguise at this point.
Yeah, and I think this stanza in and of itself is, again, relating to a kind of bringing down of the hostilities of the stanzas before, where it's like, now that Vafþrúðnir has said, why are you standing there? Take a seat. Let us find out. And then this kind of becomes his way of saying, oh, well, it is true that if a man who's in deficit of the road comes into another man's hall, he should speak wisely and not do his, weave his own fate into ill. And so this is kind of a bringing down of the kind of flaring up in the stanzas before, a relenting, if you will, on both sides. Okay, let's see how this goes, kind of. And
right.
I believe we moved to stanza 11. Sorry, I got an interloper has come in briefly. All right, you want to say hi to everybody real quick? And then you got to go back up to bed, okay?
Hi.
No, you got to say hi.
Hi.
Right there.
Hi.
Hi, Eldred.
All right, go ahead. Go back upstairs. You're, no. Come on. You got to go to bed. Come on.
Mommy said that I have to wait in Sissy's room. And,
Okay.
Yeah, and Sissy's going to bed.
Yeah, that means you got to go to bed. Okay. All right. So we're having sleeping difficulties, if you will. Let's see here on stanza 11. Vafþrúðnir says, "Speak forth now, Gainrath. If there from the floor thou wouldst thy wisdom make known, what name has the steed that each morn anew the day of mankind doth draw?" And Odin speaks in return. Skínfaxi is he, the steed, who for men the glittering day doth draw, and best of horses to heroes he seems, and brightly his mane doth burn. So in these first, the 11 and 12, Vafþrúðnir is asking the name of the steed of day, or the steed of daylight, of the heavenly wardens, the coming of the light in association with time itself, not perhaps say warmth or the scaling of light, but also, again, the rotation of the sky or the rotation of the earth as we move around, the steed, the vehicle in which that movement is responsible for, is skínfaxi, which means shining hair, or shining mane. And it is ridden by the heavenly warden Dagr, or day. Dagr is after now it's spelled Dagr, but it's Dagr because remember that G is kind of soft GY sound, and then once you say it like that, it makes sense. It's Dagr. And he speaks poetically about, you know, the light of his mane burning bright. So then we have, again, another positioning of questioning. Vafþrúðnir spoke. "Speak forth now, Gainrath. If there from the floor thou wouldst thy wisdom make known, what name has the steed from the east anew and brings the night for the noble gods?" So, again, we're establishing the rotation of the earth. We're talking about the turners and the two heavenly wardens, now bringing on into the next one, which is about to be, you know, brought up, but it's brought up by the vehicle, which I find very interesting. And another part of this is, I don't know if Lord Odin has taken the seat, as the references always being said, you know, from the floor. But again, this may be an idea that Lord Odin has taken a seat, but that Vafþrúðnir is on a dais or on a raised platform, if you will. And he's asking, you know, from the east, which horse brings the night? And this is, of course, the second heavenly warden. And Odin speaks, he says, "Hrimfaxi, name they the steed that anew brings night for the noble gods. Each morning foam from its bit there falls, and there thence comes the dew in the dales." So one of the big things that's set up here is we're talking about the passing of day heaven to night heaven. And it's worth noting again that our ancestors saw the gods as living in the heavenly place, which would be center and above the middle guard. And so the turning of the day, the turning of the night is brought to them as well. It's like imagining the upper realm being in the center of the place unknown, the Midgard center, and there on heaven's mountains, in the mountains, is Ausgarður, and there the tree is the center, and its roots dip down through heaven's mountains and into the realms beyond all knowing. And so that is why you will often see when they speak of the rotations of the sun and the moon and the sky, day and night, it is brought to the gods as to the elves, as to men, because that was the way of seeing. Even though the seeing of it still stands, the gods are in the center and above. It is not as a literal sense that, and in the scanning clouds underneath heaven is where the Leosalfar live. And that can be, again, like an ethereal sense between the two worlds. But that is why you'll often see these announcements being said that the sun and the moon are both experienced by the gods. If anybody has any questions to that. I do have to take a break one moment, if I could. I actually have
Negative.
me making a great amount of noise, and I need to get him upstairs.
All right, we'll go
destroy something behind me.
Get him to sleep.
I'll be right back.
All right. So while we're taking a putting the children to bed break, couple of throw out there kind of help us out points. I mentioned all of the different places that Victory Never Sleeps is being sourced to where people can find it. Couple things: like, share, subscribe, do all of those things. It ups our algorithm in any and all of those places, and we appreciate it. Also, if you would, please invite others to listen to this if you think it would be entertaining for them, if you think it would be helpful for them, or you think it's something they might be interested in. A lot of the time, because of the situation we're in the world, we really have to rely on a lot of word of mouth and people who know sharing it with other people. So please do that. Our biggest challenge, I would say, for growth is that the vast majority of people that we would like to see come home to Asatru don't know that we exist. So if you guys would help with that, it's much appreciated. Also, if this is the first time you are watching or listening to this program and you are interested in what we're doing, I would encourage you to go to runestone, runestone.org, and see who we are and what we are about. We're working on getting that website updated and completely revamped. Matter of fact, our very own producer, Nick, from the I was going to say from the bowels of this podcast, but I think that doesn't put it quite the way I want it. Yeah, he's doing the work on that, and we appreciate it. But yeah, if you're listening to this and you're a regular listener, I hope that you are a member of the AFA. If you are not, I would encourage you to join us and be part of what we're doing. If this resonates with you, certainly if you're eligible to join, if you're one of our folk and this is the faith of your ancestors, then join us, help us, be part of what we're doing. We're doing amazing things, and we would love to have you there doing it with us. Yeah, I think that's what I got for right now. Looks like Svan has returned to us.
I've
So,
effectively tamed. Yeah, I was hearing stuff behind me, and he had opened up a
nice
giant beach
drop.
umbrella and was spinning it around behind me. And I didn't know how long that was going to go on for, so I was like, I gotta nip that right away.
It's festive. Aubrey had me eating imaginary food when we started this. I thought there'd be more of that to come.
Well, and I really wanted to bring up a point that I think certain people I've heard of older like Nordic scholars try to conceptualize, and you'll see it a lot in relation to Yggdrasil in artwork. You'll see Yggdrasil kind of portrayed in a lot of different ways. Generally, I think that it's not discussed enough about the way that our ancestors conceptualized that which is. Seeing some people kind of try to analogate Yggdrasil to kind of almost like it reminds me of what is that? It's Jewish religion, Kabbalah. Where they have these kind of like a central axis with these kind of worlds kind of bearing out of it. And I've seen some of that in earlier Asatru conceptualizations. The idea, or the other one is, this is a newer one that's kind of coming about, and it really just boggles my mind that there would be this kind of a testament of moving things and completely going away from Aryan mythos, where, in essence, the three roots that are spoken of and being the three different levels of the cosmos are actually all in the lower level, and that the middle world is kind of like a glob in the middle of a stick, kind of like a marshmallow on a stick, and the gods are on the top of the stick and the roots are at the bottom of the stick, and all the mentions of them being in these different levels are wrong. That's kind of crazy to me as well. But it's worth remembering that our ancestors saw that that Muspel and Nevel are two component polarized forces, and that which is in the middle, where we stand, is the middle guard. And that which is below it is Nidavellir, where the Svart Alvar live, that nethered place. And then even lower still is the place away from the gods, away from time, and the order of time, which is, again, Helgard. And that place is still connected to Nidavellir. To Niflheim. Muspelheim is too far away. It's too hot. It's too, it's not a place that can be kind of encapsulated. It is better that things that survive are closer to Niflheim because of how terrible. And so they're, they kind of gloss over the idea of Himmelbjörk, the heavenly mountains. And it's perfectly kind of accessible in the idea of the Greco-Roman Mount Olympus. But then again, this is clearly an Aryan conceptualization of the central place, the high place or the central place, sometimes often both. And wherever the gods are and the people closest to that central place is of height. And that would be kind of the Greco-Roman view of it. Whereas I think that our ancestors saw the gods as being in that central place, and that central place was not always fully known, but that it rested upon the heavenly mountains. And in the heavenly mountains, there is Ausgarður. And Ausgarður is a place within the heavenly place. And there at the center of that heavenly place is the tree. And those roots go out and down and is the center access point of everything, but it is not quite literally like a marshmallow on a stick and that it's based in, in the nether, and there's like the gods on top. Like, I feel like there's a lot of conceptualizations that you might see if you go looking for artwork in relation to Yggdrasil, and you'll see the worlds in the center and some of the worlds in the roots and some of the worlds in the branches. And again, none of these are particularly wrong per se. They're just, I think that they do have a tendency to change the trajectory of where I think our ancestors conceptualized, because no matter where they were at, they always felt that the gods were in the central place and above them. And that has great significance to the spiritual concepts of our gods. And that we saw our ancestors as going down into a place away from the shadow or the shaping of, into the shadow and the shaping of time. And that wasn't seen as a Christian sense of like bad or good, that it was part of the cycle. And that tree in the center of everything, in the center of heaven, is the linchpin. It's the capstone upon the arch of everything that the cosmos is built upon or balanced upon. So when we hear this, and you hear it also in Vafþrúðnismál, and you hear it in Grimnismál, where they speak of the sun rising, and that the sun is called many different names amongst the gods, the elves, the men, the Dvergar or Svartalfar, and of the dead. And this, of course, is giving the poet lots of ammunition to kind of create a mood in their poetry. But it also correlates to the idea that we are all, in essence, especially to our ancestors, that the physicality of us being greatly connected. And even though we could say to ourselves now, with our understanding of science, I still believe that the gods are in the center and above. That hasn't changed. It's just, it is different. It is a spiritual sense now than less so much a physical sense, because our mythos and our stories have, again, those meanings drawn in them. They were not literal, or they were not, especially after they're compounded together in the 10th century to the 12th century by Snorri. There's issues. There are problems with them. There are, mistakes. There are fragments, and there are things that we are working through. They are not whole, and we try to work towards them to make them whole, but they're not whole in a linguistic or scholarly sense. The spiritual sense, I think, is still quite very whole. Seeing the gods as in the center place and above doesn't change.
So many of these things are we are spatial beings that exist in space and time. There's certain orientations that our body naturally has associations with that make sense. It doesn't matter whether the gods literally exist in the center and above. Conceiving of the gods in the center that our world revolves around, but them being central to our life, central to our world, central to existence, and up, looking up, literally, we look up to our gods. Being upwardly oriented projects towards the future, towards the stars, towards the unreachable, towards, that is growth and moving forward. Regression is moving down and below. Things that are hidden have other connotations to them. It's not always a good or a bad thing, but it's certainly a cosmic, aspirational, and future orientation, looking upward and directing things upward. And when you retreat within yourself, for good reason sometimes, that's fine. When you harken back to the past, when you go to things that are lower and more primal and more rooted in the past and the chthonic, that's fine too. But that being directed as underneath and below and lower, directionality matters to how we conceive of ourselves in relation to the world around us. The idea of a sacred center and the idea of the axis mundi is fundamental to all Aryan thought. The idea that our gods are above, are up high. You have to ascend through, the Rainbow Bridge, or climbing Olympus, or doing some reaching up and climbing upward into the clouds as far as we could conceive. You go upward to reach our gods. affects how we see them and how we orient ourselves. It re-stresses hierarchy. Our gods are literally above us. We are literally below them. Just the whole concept I mentioned a second ago, ascension. The idea of becoming more is to ascend, to go upwards. Descent is always something into a lower level of existence. So those orientations affect us fundamentally, whether we realize it or not, in what we do and how we carry ourselves and how we conceive of our place in the world and the place of our gods. But let's get back to the poem.
Yeah, that was a bit of a soapbox on that one.
That's fine. Well, so that's the thing. The lore is going to bring out interesting and hopefully useful and spiritually beneficial things as they come to light. And that's why I appreciate this opportunity and kind of going through this with Svan is it causes us to see different things in different ways or to draw important things out of the lore to share with you guys. And I know sometimes we meander away from the story a little bit, but I hope it kind of enriches how you guys see some things and your Asatru practice.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting too the roots, the root that is in heaven and the realm below it, the middle worlds. So again, that's why I often talk about the gods as being the apex of time and that which is brought into the middle world. And it does flow to another root, the well of memory. All things that interact in the center flow there, and they in turn fall into the lower realm. But that root draws up. That root draws up much of what of that which has happened, that which is past. The eye of Lord Odin resides there, and then even more still, the lowest well still it levels off into the Elvigar, the 11 rivers of Niflheim. But there is a root, and that root draws up, and there is a reason why Nidhogger is trying to sever that root, and so that. Yeah, this placement and understanding helps people kind of, again, understand what you, as you said, the movement placement matters. The upper, the middle, the lower, it all really matters, and it shows over and over and over again in Aryan mythos. Let's see. So we were 14 or 15. I think we said. Let's see. Oh, so we are 15.
Okay.
Okay. Vafþrúðnir speaks. 15. Speak forth now, Gainrath, if there from the floor thou wouldst thy wisdom make known. What name has the river that twixt the realms of the gods and the giants go? So, again, when we're speaking about cosmology and we're speaking about rivers, there are rivers above, rivers in the middle, and there's rivers below. And it was kind of seen as the rivers were crossing points between two convergent planes. And those those rivers are again, liminal spaces, but they're not always. We know that there are 11 rivers in Niflheim, and not every river is a convergent space to another plane. They're seen as channels, if you will, or liminal spaces, but within the realm. And so we know that the middle realm holds its rivers, and that the upper realm owns its rivers, and they're spoken of quite often. A lot of people try to correlate them to be just in the lower realm, or they'll just say like, "Oh, it's a sacred river." That's kind of the translation they have for it, but that's not the case, because the word itself and where it's placed is also, I think, significant. And this one does really kind of lend to clearly another story, and we'll kind of I'll make reference to it here. the Iving River. So, and again, we kind of lend this to another story in which Lord Odin challenges his son in disguise. And I think this is, of course, reminiscent of another Slavic tale between Perun and Velis, but those are just, again, theories kind of throwing out. So Odin speaks, and he says in 16, Iving is the river that twixt the realms of the gods and the giants goes. For all time ever, open it flows. No ice on the river there is. So it is often referenced that Thor, when he leaves Ausgarder and enters into the heavenly proper, he cannot take the rainbow bridge down to the tree. He has to cross over two rivers in specifics, the cooling one and the serpentine one, Cormt and Ormt, and he walks around the walls of Asgard to get to the seats of doom. But there is, again, oftentimes a great mentioning of the rivers that lie in between the gods and the Jotnar, and Iving is one of these rivers, the wide river. And I kind of, this is mentioned as when Thor crosses over into Jotunheim, or when Thor is trying to cross over from Jotunheim into Ausgarder, or into heaven proper, I should say. There is the mentioning of crossing a river. And again, these are liminal spaces between convergent planes. Spiritual transitions. And this still holds today in many traditions, whether it's our Gallic cousins, or whether it's our even Slavic cousins. The idea of crossing over a river before entering into a sacred space or a sacred grove has a great, spiritual significant meaning. And again, that just means that you're entering or leaving behind one mundane for the other, for the spiritual better, if you will. So this is number 16, and Vafþrúðnir speaks in 17. He says, "Speak forth now, Gengrath, if there from the floor thou wouldst thy wisdom make known. What name has the field wherein fight shall meet Surt and the gracious gods?" I love the word Svausur, the beautiful, the pleasant, the gracious gods. Of course, they're speaking. He's saying, where is the final battle going to be laid amongst, your kind and the gods? So, and he specifically mentions, of course, this is one, finnast at Sutur. Sutur is the key component there to lay towards the final battle. Odin speaks Vigrider, or Vigrider, if you were to, put it together, is the field wherein fight shall meet Surt and the gracious gods. 100 miles each way does it measure, and so are its boundaries set. I've seen people speculate about numerological things. I don't know how much that has value. I have pondered it myself. I wonder if it was more or less an idea to give a sense of greatness. We could say, like 1,000,000 miles or what have you. And I think that the idea of this being the literal, but the word hundroth is there. It is certainly 100. But it's, it's translated to miles. But again, we could try to be like biblical scholars and say, well, what is a rasta to a mile in relation to, and so on and so forth. And I don't think that is the intent of the story. I think the intent of the story is to make the audience go, wow, that's like,
it's really big.
It's really big in every direction. But I have seen people really, really just grind that nail tip on, the mysteries of that. And perhaps there is something that can be found in there. But me personally, I kind of just didn't want to take away from the mythos of it. But I'm always open. So if anybody has any, furtherance on that, I do love to hear any, wisdom gleaning in that relation. So the questions have been asked, and then Vafþrúðnir gives a relent of, wow, I do have, I picked some obscure, basically, well, and I've always taken this as 4 points, if you will. He takes 4 points of heaven and 4 points of the middle world, or 4 points of the cosmos. And he does 2 in the heavenly sense and 2 in the lower or chthonic sense, where he does, horses of the day, horses of the night, or the heavenly turnings. And then, the field of battle and the rivers of Jotunheim and Midgard. So now it begins to turn. And Vafþrúðnir says, wise art thou, guest. To my bench shall you go. In our seats let us speak together. Here in the hall, our heads, O guest, shall we wager our wisdom upon. Okay, so this clearly answers a couple of things. One, this is the story where the head is wagered, as I've mentioned before. 2, the stories as we go through them, like, again, we don't really prep for these episodes. We go through them raw. And you will see this trope utilized in other stories. Again, it is like when Loki wagers his head against the Dvergar. So this is, again, another common essence and usage, but it is placed elsewhere in other stories. And I remember it kind of being spread from one particular story, and that is this one. So that answers that. And again, it also answers another question, is because the speaking from the floor versus speaking from the seats. Now there's a moment where things get close, where it's like, okay, you've proven your worth. Now we're going to sit face to face. We're going to sit close, but we're going to up the ante on these bets. So, let's see here. Oh, and I wanted to speak a little bit too on Eving. Eving, the river, I have always kind of placed as one of the central rivers of the middle world, even though it's in Jotunheim. It is still, again, that the place of, matter and resistance and the things that flow in the center. And I think one day we'll be able to go over the rivers of heaven and the rivers of the middle world and rivers of the lower world. But let's see, on stanza 20. So Odin then speaks. First answer me well if thy wisdom avails, and thou knowest, Vafþrúðnir, now, in the earliest times, whence came the earth, or the sky, thou giant sage? And if you look over in the Old Norse, you can see here they use the lowercase version of the earth is, of course, Jarth. It's where we J-O-R-Ev. It's where we get survives in English in the word yard. But you always see it as lowercase when they're just speaking of the earth in general, not the spirit of the earth. It's kind of like saying land. But also in the next line, it says up himin. And this is another point that I wanted to bring up, was that himin means heaven. He doesn't say sky. He says heaven, the upper heavens. And so a lot of people that, and not too many people, but just to let them know, like when we say the word heaven, we're not stealing that from Christianity. That is clearly a Germanic word that was taken in translation, the upper heavens. And again, it survives in Himmelbjörg, and it's just Anglo-Saxon was Heovum, or heaven. So he asks, whence comes the earth and the sky? And Vafþrúðnir, he speaks, he knows. Out of Ymir's flesh was fashioned the earth, and the mountains were made of his bones. The sky from the frost-cold giant's skull, and the ocean out of his blood. This is, of course, lending back to the story of Lord Odin, Vili, and Ve coming down and initiating the process of Orlog and Weird for all the gods and even before mankind and all things that begin to rotate. This is the part where the synchronization of all circles come into alignment and start to again move each other, much like a clock. And he makes mention of this, and you will see this again, because Snorri is really trying to give the Skalds references and leanings towards Heiti and Kennings in the prose Eddas, where he will then discuss more. And even in some of the modern poetry that I've done, I would make relent to the idea that Ymir's thoughts, burned coldly in the sky or gathered in frustration. And that's really, the clouds. So we find this the Heiti here, and the giant skull, Ymir's skull, is the hall of Delingur. And many people could think of it as the atmosphere, if you will, but it is the encapsulation of the middle world and all that is in mass for us. So here we have in 22, Odin speaks, "Next answer me well if thy wisdom avails, and thou knowest, Vafþrúðnir, now, whence came the moon over the world of men that fares, and the flaming sun?" So, this, I was looking at some of the translations here, and I do find, again, Mauni and Sol, and a lot of people in modern Asatru say Suna. It is worth remembering too that the more common usage of the later Nordic period was Sol, which kind of affixed to other languages in the Baltic area as well. If you're talking about like with the Latvians, they say Saul, and it would be more akin to that. Suna again, being a kind of like a hybridization of Central Germanic and Nordic as well. So Vafþrúðnir speaks and says, "Mundulferi, the twisting traveler, is he who begat the moon and fathered the flaming sun. The round of heaven each day they run to tell the time from men." So there has been, a great amount of speculation as to the origins of Mundulferi, the origins of the story in which are the sun and the moon seen as mortals that are brought up from the world, or that are they begat from the divine, or again with Mundalfari, and you'll find it in with a lot of people that translate the Eddas. They'll just slap Jotun on it right away, and we can't entirely say that is the case, but that the one, the twisting, the centered one, the one that holds the turning place, he begets the sun and the moon, and they are given to round each day to tell the time for men. And we speak of that with Raido, the rune. We speak that with the idea of the ordering of all times. And when we speak of calendar sense, I think it's worth noting that, again, certain of our people held to the lunar calendars, certain of our people actually lent to a solar lunar calendar, and that it wasn't entirely lunar. What's going on, buddy? You are up super late.
Dad, you need to be quick because I'm ready. I need to sleep stand. There's a pillow right there. I'm sleeping on it.
Okay, so go ahead and sleep there.
And you have to do it quick because I can't wait to go in bed.
Okay, I will try to go as swiftly as possible. We are trying to get my son to shift out of. I don't know if people with co-sleeping, but we have co-slept with all of our children up until about 3, and we have a very large bed. We are not big people, so there's not a smothering issue, and we both sleep like we are in coffins. I sleep kind of from the military, just folded up and angled on my side, and I don't really move that much. So had the joy of having the baby with us, but I know that's not for everyone. Not everybody can do that, but one thing is, it definitely, the transition into their own bed, it wasn't difficult for the other two, but for my third has become a challenge.
Random parenting note on that. I do not sleep like a coffin. I am large and I flail.
Right.
I need to occupy maximal space in my flailing. Much like the Hagalaz rune. I take a Hagalaz posture in the bed. And so the cats have figured out not to be too close, lest bad things befall them. Mandy's gotten whacked a few times because I flop around. So that was never a thing with Aubrey. But I'll say this. She was awesome, really young. We put her in her own crib, and then relatively short, Mandy'd probably tell you a little bit better about how fast it was until we put her in her own like big girl bed in there. But she's been great about sleeping on her own. We're really fortunate with that. I know a lot of parents that's a challenge. A lot of kids are different that way. But we've been really lucky with Aubrey that way. So,
sorry, I'm back.
Oh no, I thought you were again trying to cross that ice.
So as we move into stanza 24, Odin spake, "Third, answer me well, if wise thou art called. If thou knowest it, Vafþrúðnir now, whence came the day over mankind that fares, or night with the narrowing moon?" Here he's speaking about the totality of the heavenly wardens, and I think it's more often than not the a not understanding in Asatru to speak of the heavenly wardens in relation to, say, for instance, Delingur. And some people have referred to Delingur as an Alvar. Some people have referred to Delingur as an Aus. And I think that the confusion there is, valid, because we don't have much, but I've always kind of accounted them to the realm, the keeper of the sanctity of around the middle world, or the atmosphere, the spheric shape of the hall. The hall and the skull are one and the same, and Dellinger's hall is there, and it kind of becomes the source of day and night and sun and moon. But I think it's also worth noting that the sun and the moon were kind of seen as outside of the hall because of their differentiation to what was happening closer, if you will. I think that's an interesting thing, especially in relation to the revolutions of the earth, the revolutions of the sun, and the moon having only one horse, and it's the only one that doesn't rotate, or has its own axis. So I think that's interesting. So let's see. He says, Vafþrúðnir speaks in stanza 25. The father of day is Dellingur called, and the night was begotten by Nor. Full moon and old by the gods were fashioned to tell the time for men. And this again lays a point on not the goddess of night, the heavenly warden of night, or the rotation of the earth in, again, that all that process being one and a kind of calculated timing of things, not is born of Narvi or Narvi. And there's very little mention outside of that. But that in the olden days, the gods set forth the sky, the sun, and the moon in their place, and to regulate or to set up the convictions of time. And that's why, I always bring up the gods as being the apex and deliverers of time, and that the rotations of all things correspond to that ordering. And another reason why I'm also a kind of big proponent of, if you're talking about calendar work, utilizing a solar lunar calendar versus strictly a lunar calendar, is because of these stanzas here, speaking about both of them as being markers of time. And I see people argue like, no, we should only use a lunar calendar because the Anglo-Saxons were marked as being in this sense with the lunar calendar. And I think that was probably correct for them at their time, but not throughout. And we see it later on in runic calendars where the solar lunar combination was clearly used to create a more diligent timekeeping system. So let's see. Oh, another thing worth kind of bringing up too is the correlation between Dellingur, or the word Del, and Heimdallr, and the idea of the flame or the spring of light or the source of light, as kind of a correlation to those. That's why when we were speaking about Lord Heimdallr as being the dale or the place of home versus the flame or the light of home, comes from this, the heavenly warden Dellingur. And he is Day's father. So we are moving into 26. Odin spake, 26. Forth answer me well, if wise thou art called, if thou knowest. Vafþrúðnir now, whence did the winter come, or the summer warm, first with the gracious gods? So this again too, I think, lays some interesting points about Father Winter, or why that the Father Winter nomenclature has persisted. And another, of course, too, is locality and geography that we have here. In 27, Vafþrúðnir answers back, Vinsval he was, who was Winter's father, and Svösuth summer begat. So the question as to whether or not Vinsvalur and Svösuður were of Jotnar or Alvar is not, fully specified. It's just speculated that they were of Ymir's kin. So we know that the begetting of Ymir created many, many powers. We know that from Ymir's slaying, we have the Jotnar of the middle, the Thursur and the Risi, and then we also have the Wains or the Vanir, and we have the Alvar, and we have the Dvergar. And so the four parts becoming out of the center. And of course, I think generally during this time, anything that is not the Aesir will be labeled as Jotun, but I think that we see these kind of glimpses towards the idea that there may be other parts that are kind of being lent to, especially again, like I said, with the Dvergar or the Svautafar, the Alvar, the Vanir, and the Jotuns kind of being the four fractures of the center. So in 28, Odin speaks, Fifth, answer me well, if wise thou art called, if thou knowest it, Vafþrúðnir now. What giant first was fashioned of old, and the eldest of Ymir's kin? And he answers in retort. And this again is lending towards more mentionings of the slaying of Ymir and the descendancy coming from one in particular. And this is mentioned elsewhere as well. And so sometimes the Jotun of the middle are referred to as his kin. Vafþrúðnir spoke, winters unmeasured ere earth was made, was the birth of Bergelmir. Thróðgelmir's son was the giant strong, and Aurgelmir's grandson of old. So it's worth noting here that Aurgelmir is Ymir. It's another name for Ymir. And it was from him, Thróðgelmir was born, but it was Bergelmir who survived the deluge, if you will, the slaying of his grandfather. And so we see this kind of descendancy here, again, with the point of teaching the poet to remember these things, that Ymir is Aurgelmir. Aurgelmir has Thróðgelmir, and Thróðgelmir begets Bergelmir. Again, and the translations here of the shaping strength or the shaping clay versus the strength shaping, and then the mountain or solidified. So if you look at them, I've always kind of lent towards the idea about the shaping of clay, and the idea that Aurgelmir and Ymir he's in this inconstant state, and that there is a movement towards the creational state, or perhaps like three epochs of this, in which there's like, again, not a solidification, then there's a movement towards solidification, and then Bergelmir is solidification by the mountain as its usage. So, but it is Bergelmir who survives the deluge of the slaying of Ymir. So that I know has a tendency to throw a lot of people off when it comes to what's the answer? Who's the answer? But it's again, Aurgelmir is another name for Ymir. Let's see. In stanza 30, Odin speaks, Sixth, answer me well, if wise thou art called, if thou knowest Vafþrúðnir now, Whence did Aujilmr come? With the giant's kin long since, thou giant sage. Now, this is, again, making mention of one of the rivers, and this river is, of course, mentioned too during the beginning, when the flames of Muspel started to melt Niflheim, the rivers, the spring Vergelmer, and the rivers that spring from it were created. And so Vafþrúðnir speaks of his origin. Down from Elvaugur. Now, Elvaugur are the rivers that flowed. So bear in mind that it's not a singular river, but 11 rivers. Down from Elvaugur did Venom drop, and waxed till a giant it was, and thence arose our giant race, and thus so fierce we are found. So this again, Aujilmr is Ymir, and he is brought from the venom and the dripping of the 11 rivers of the nether, or the underworld. And those 11 rivers are aptly named so. They are just horrid and grotesquely named poetically. Gjöll, the river of mournful cries. Sleeve is cruel, and Fimbulthulur is the terrible singer, and there's like the battle wound, the festering battle wound. I mean, they're all just deeply, carrying the sense of like their primordialness. They're in an inhabitableness of these rivers is overly stated again and again, and that's what makes them so venomous and so primordial, is because they are not held in the confines of the ordering of the gods. The gods have taken the primordial powers and brought them to heal, but deep down below there are still the rivers of creation that were not brought to heal, and that is what Ymir was formed from. That's what Aujilmr was formed from. And again, they emphasize this. That's why we're so fierce. Odin spake. 32. Seventh, answer me well, if wise thou art called. If thou knowest it, Vafþrúðnir now, how begat he children, the giant grim, who never a giantess knew? So, for those, anyone familiar too with the Prose Eddas, this is again the spawning of the middle Jotnar. Do not discount the children of Muspel, nor the children or the Hrimthursar of Niflheim as already being ancient beings that existed. But here is the center. Here is the primordial beings that are in the middle world. And how did they begin? How did they come about? And he says, how did they come about if never a giantess he knew? Never did he lay, with a female of his kind. And Vafþrúðnir speaks and says, they say that neath the arms of the giant of ice grew a man-child and maid together, and foot with foot did the wise one fashion a son that 6 heads bore. So I think, again, considering the value of words in relation to the audience, we know that this first, by him saying, how did he beget children if he never, had the female energy or the female place. So this immediately becomes abhorrent. It's outside of the norm. It's outside of the orderly way. And it's even emphasized more with a son with 6 heads. Again, that kind of gasping factor of like, ugh. It just really emphasizes that this is not seen as something normal. The androgynous reprocreation of the self that Ymir does is not seen as something, but is seen as something primordial and off and just, again, producing things of such a deep, fierce, chthonic level. And I think that our ancestors saw the Jotnar as evolutionary beings as well, that, say, for instance, like Vafþrúðnir is descended from this, but not as, say, viciously contorted as the predecessors of his beings. And so I think our ancestors saw the Jotnar as kind of, they were living beings, they are living beings that refine themselves as they go, but that these were the origins of these. And some people have taken this in a lot of different ways. I've heard people even say, and I'm not discounting this at all, it's just interesting to think about, is the idea that if Ymir and all Yelmer is the earth, that the begatting of these beings, the time of the Jotuns is the time in which life is kind of, again, forming, creating on the flesh, coming out of the flesh of him. But it is, again, inconstant and in an ever fluctuating state. And it, again, lends towards the monstrosity of it all. And I've heard people say, like, this is kind of, they akin that to, again, the epochs of time before humanity, where we kind of see the climate of our planet suddenly grip down into a very tight thrum, whereas previously it was, up and down and up and down. And I think that's, again, very, very interesting to think about. We move into 34 and the 8th question that Odin now gives. And again, there's a litany of questions that I believe they lead up to 14 in total.
So worth mentioning, and Svan touched on this, but I think it's a lot of the time. All right, what angle do I want to come at this at? So sick people look for things to justify their sickness. And they, see, they'll find bits of lore that contain illness, the grotesque, the ugly, the unwhole, and they'll latch onto those like, see, it was in the lore, so it must be good. Completely negating that, no, that's the bad guys. Like, just on the most simple level, when you look at these things, it's very clear when things are done in the right order and the result is beautiful and obviously beneficial and spoken highly of and praised and celebrated. Or there's hideous, deformed monsters that come about through, asexual reproduction. Or there's, the enemy of the gods who slays or orchestrates the slaying of Balder. Yeah, he changes genders and gets mounted by a stallion. Whenever you see perversion in our lore, it's associated with, that's what the bad guys do. That's not what the good guys do. And on the most simple childish level, this is not understood by people who don't read our lore honestly. And I think that's worth just mentioning, digesting, having that in your pocket, because I see over on the side, there's a number of people that have interactions with people claiming to be Asatru that are far too woke for their own good. And these are those bits of lore they pick up on as like strange anomalies. The context is everything. When the villains do something, that's saying it's bad. When the heroes do something, that tends to say that it's good. Those little points are very obvious to anybody who reads through them and actually looks at the story. But I don't think the other, I don't think that the unhealthy amongst us do that. I think they look for anything they can latch onto, and that's something to think about.
Yeah, and you bring this up too, because I can almost hear people trying to counter that. Well, they use the good things from the aberrant. They use Sleipnir. They use Gullinbursti. They use Gungnir. They use Mjolnir. And again, I think the point too is when we talk about catalytic divine and or let's say divine powers utilizing catalytic spiritual beings, and I'm speaking in reference to Loki, that these catalytic events happen and bear forth things that the gods use, but they're missing the point that, again, I think the gods are stating that the continuance of doing this only begets to the end of creating a festering wound. And I think that's the point of that they completely miss. They try to say, oh, he does these things and he's the bad guy, but they certainly benefit from his degeneracy. And it's like, I think you're missing the point of the warning of that is that if you continue to do that and gain benefit off of this catalytic nature that is against everything you're doing, it eventually breeds a problem that you're going to have to face in the long run. In 35, Vafþrúðnir then returns and he says, "Winters unmeasured, ere earth was made, was the birth of Berjelmr." Remember, Berjelmr is the third of, or the second, I should say, of descendancy from Alljelmr or Ymir. The first knew I well when the giants wise in a boat of old was born. And again, this is referencing to the Berjelmr, the Jotun, escaping on a log. Because they, again, using the word boat, they don't actually just straight translate that to boat, but it's the floating, like Luther's, of Lagre. I need to look at the meaning of that word before I say that. But I will say this much, is that it's not said about, it's that he escapes with his wife, who is unnamed, on a piece of wood that in the deluge. And again, this really holds true to the mythos of the slaying of Ymir. When the slaying of Ymir is conducted, that does not completely cut off anything, but revamps everything down. So the Jotnar are boiled down to the singular. The Vanir are boiled down to the singular, the two. So in essence, the slaying of Ymir brings about the masculine and feminine pairing of the Alvar, the Dvergar, the Vanir, and the Jotnar. And now they are brought into alignment, and they have a masculine and feminine side. And, whenever you hear that about Bergelmer and his wife, that's really what that is that the gods smote the incongruency of that and created masculine and feminine all the way around. Let's see. We're trucking right along.
Mm-hmm.
So as we move to 36, Odin speaks. Ninth, answer me well, if wise thou art called. If thou knowest it, Vafþrúðnir now, whence comes the wind that fares over the waves, yet never itself is seen? This is funny because me and another Gothar were speaking about this over at Oster, Gothi Mayo. Fine gentleman who knows the stories very, very well. And so me and him kind of going back and forth trying to figure out, okay, wait, what was it said in this one? What was it said in that one? And we helped each other out on this one. Vafþrúðnir speaks in 37. In eagle guise, at the end of heaven, Hreisvelk sits, they say, and from his wings doth the wind come forth to move over the world of men. That's an important detail I really placed in the cosmological picture that I had, set up as part of the artwork. Is you can look closely over the horizon of Yardir of the Middle Garth. You see an eagle with flowing winds blowing from his wings, and that is Hreisvelk, the corpse gulper. I want to look it up right now, but I'm gonna.
I think so.
Yes. Which is another, because again, Nidogr, the soul of Ymir that drips down into the nether, is like nether corpse consumer. So there's a lot of there as well, but I can't quite, and I want to look it up, but I want to keep kind of going. So he sits, and it says here, sitter á himins enda. He sits on the edge of heaven. Jotun in Arnarham. In Arnar is a eagle, and Ham or Hamur is the shape of, the spiritual shape. He's a Jotun who sits in eagle shape. And over all men, the winds come from his wings. Odin speaks in 38. 10th, answer me now if thou knowest all the fate that is fixed for the gods. Whence came up north to the kin of the gods. Rich in temples and shrines he rules, though of gods he was not begot. So a couple things about this, and I've actually Easter egged a little bit of this at Njord's Hof. In the stories, when I speak about the war between the gods, I talk often about when they first send their emissary, Gulve, they send her up, and then when she is cast out as Heath, the Shining One, she falls from heaven. And I did that because of this stanza, in which of Lord Njordr coming up to the gods. And again, the usage of the word god and ausa or ausum is really important to understand here. They're not saying that Njordr is some different race. They're not like people try to say that with the Vanir and the Jotuns and all that. It's that he's not an ausa until he joins them. And then he becomes an ausa. The whence came up north to the kin of the gods, rich in temples and shrines he rules, though of the gods he was not begot. So he was, again, this is showing that strata of natural law and cosmic order between the Ausir or the Aesir and the Vanir. And that is speaking again of that alignment. And I mean,
the directionality here is really important as well. So the Aesir, the gods of cosmic order, the gods that are so far above us and that inspire us upwards, are juxtaposed with the Vanir that are chthonic, that are more primal, that are more nature-based and fecundity and, primal strength, wisdom of old times, ancient wisdom, old things, came up to these gods that are guiding us towards a glorious future and unite with them. So that's really kind of a special point as well. He didn't go to the gods, he went up to the gods. And I think again, that's why those points of directionality are very subtle, but they reinforce things over and over again.
And I kind of spoke of that polarity when Ymir in the middle world is slain. There are the four components that are created, and they are given the masculine and the feminine. And Lord Njörður is the masculine element of the Vanir. Just like, again, being kind of spoken of, just following after Berjelmur as being the masculine force, or the progenital masculine force of the Jotnar. And that's where they come from, is kind of that. And then again, it's emphasized, and this is the Easter egg. Vafþrúðnir speaks. He says, "In the home of the Wanes." So a lot of people might be wondering what that means, but the word in the Old Norse is Vanaheimi. I Vanaheimi skopahan this rein. In their kingdom is where he, or in their creation, in their home is where he comes from. The Wanes is an English kind of lateral word. You'll see it in some of the writings in Asatru where they'll refer to the Vanir as the Wanes. And the Wanes has two meanings, much like Herrir. One, it can mean cyclical, that which rises and falls and then rises again. And it also means that which moves across or moves along a path. Oftentimes a path that starts low, zeniths high, and then goes low again. And so the reiteration of why the Vanir, and why I call them the gods of natural order, is that they are interconnected with the cyclical nature of the chthonic. And this is the good side aligning with the gods versus, of course, the Jotnar are not going to align with the gods because, well, they do, some of them do, but for the most part they're not, because they remember Berjelmur and the origins of their their primordial origins being smote by order, and they don't take too kindly to that. So he says, "In the home of the Wanes did the wise ones create him, and gave him as a pledge to the gods. At the fall of the world shall he fare once more home to the Wanes so wise." So another thing I've seen is who survives Ragnarok, and there are two separate mentions, and this one is the mention of Lord Njörður and his daughter Freyja, and that's where that little bit of lore comes from. I think that the recessing of the earthly elements is a good thing in the sense of Ragnarok, is that it's basically saying the element of life, the seed of life, and the ability to grow again is still maintained despite the great devastation. Whereas, I don't know, I've never heard anyone say this as kind of being like a bout of cowardice or anything in relation to the way it might be perceived, but Lord Njörður is that bountifulness of the earth, and for him to recede, to return again, shows a great sense of the idea of hope that there will be a material, a middle world return, as well as, again, like the spiritual return of Baldur and Nanna.
And it's fixing stuff. One of the great cataclysms of Ragnarok is that order between realms is broken. The water is no longer restrained and it takes over the earth. The seasons are out of whack. All the things are disordered at the destruction of Ragnarok. This things going back towards their original order, things returning to that ordered state is a big part of it. One thing that I do want to mention, Chris, I'm sorry, it got overlooked earlier, a gap in our system. Chris Lucat donated $10. We appreciate that. Matt and Svan. Bad is bad and good is good. He had a question over in the chat to see if, it would still make sense. Of course it makes sense because it always makes sense. That's a thing. Is anybody reading it fairly? Our lore is not neutral. Asatru is not neutral. This isn't a collection of things that exist. It's things that exist in the context of struggle between order and chaos, between right and wrong, between what's healthy and what's unhealthy. And bad is bad and good is good. All right.
All right. So 40th stanza. Odin spake. 11th answer me well, who issue forth from the stronghold to hack each other every day. Slaughter they choose and ride to war, sit the glorious ones in reconciliation together. I love the usage of all of that. It's interesting because I think it's downplayed on purpose in order to reemphasize the answer. The stronghold is used instead of the obvious answer of that stronghold. And then gives, lean to it being answered. Vafþrúðnir speaks again. He says, all the champions every day contend in Odin's courtyard. They choose the slaughter and ride from the field, thenceforth sit reconciled. Or they sit together again. And of course, the champions, the word here, of course, is Einherjar. And the tunum is kind of seen as the area within, or the area just without Valhall or Valhalla. And again, the Einherjar are the ones that ride forth in contention of battle and dissipate themselves and recollect themselves in purification to return back to the center of the Herjar Father, which is his hall, Valhall. Odin speaks again, the 12th. 12th answer me now, how all thou knowest of the fate that is fixed for the gods, of the runes of the gods, and the giants' race. The truth indeed dost thou tell, and wide is thy wisdom, giant. And so, again, this is the relenting half. Vafþrúðnir kind of relented towards Lord Odin in the beginning and gave him seat. And now this is kind of a relenting in return. But I don't think it's a loss of ground because of what we know is coming. Or perhaps if you're not familiar with the story, this kind of like a fixing of, or a slight relent on Odin's part, is kind of the calm before the storm, if you will, or the silence right before the big bomb is dropped. So Vafþrúðnir speaks in 43. He says, of the runes of the gods and the giants' race, the truth indeed I can tell. For to every world I have won. To 9 worlds came I. To Nifhel beneath, the home where dead men dwell. So most people might hear, again, the usage of the word himmen, or heaven, and Ausgarður. And you might hear the word Nifhel in relation to Helheim. And it's worth noting that those places are, again, or Helgarður, they are encapsulated places within a place. Ausgarður is synonymous with heaven, but is not the entirety of heaven. The walls of Ausgarð are not on the edges of heaven. So that was not the way they saw the heavenly expanse, and Ausgarð is within it. Helgarður is in Niflhel, or the dark hell. That the place in which Helgarður or Helheim is a place, again, in that cycle where we are passing through, is not the darkest of the place. It is at the top, but it goes deeper and darker still and farther away. And you don't want to be marked by the gods. You don't want to be chastised and rebuked by your ancestors and refused, and then crossing those rivers into the furthest, darkest places of Niflhel. You know, you want to get to Helgard, and then from there, the transference to the folk soul, and then the ascension through the root is possible. In 44, Odin speaks, and he says, "Much have I fared, and much have I found. Much have I got from the gods. What shall live of mankind when the last there comes the mighty winter to men?" And of course, he's speaking of the in the Volaspau, the reference to the Fimble winter, the terrible winter. Vafþrúðnir speaks in return. "In Hodmimir's wood shall hide themselves Leaf and Leaf-thrasser then, the morning dews, for meat they shall have, such food shall men then find." So it's worth knowing that the names Leaf and Leaf-thrasser is, again, kind of like when we speak about father and mother, in relation to the Rigstula. Life and the will to live is the man and the woman of humanity. And so, again, we encapsulate the masculine, the feminine, and they have their names, and their names are not the literal man and woman. They are life and the will to live. And it's, again, worth noting that the reference to here, the tree itself, and I think in this part is worth noting, the reference to the root that makes Mimir's well. The root is the tree, but that in the tree of memory, or in the root of memory, that is connected to the tree, is Hodmimir's wood. So the root by Mimir's well, where no one knows, is the place in which life and the will to live shall recede, and from there gain the dew that is the sustenance of their existence. And I think that this, again, is correlating to the flow from Earth's well to Mimir's well, and the fact that they are not kind of descending down from there, but hide there in the root and hold true to the tree and live off that flowing of time, so that they can return again. They're not cut from time. They are not descending into that place that fractures away, but stop there and remain there so that they can return. Let's see. So we're on what's stanza 46?
Mm-hmm.
Odin spake, "Much have I fared, much have I found, much have I got from the gods. Whence come the sun to the smooth sky back, when Fenrir has snatched it forth?" Now, this is an interesting deviation here. And again, it may be because of meter. It may be because of misinterpretation. It may be for convenience. But we have spoken before in the Volaspau about Hati and Skjol taking the sun and the moon. And here it is referred to as Fenrir. Now, it is worth remembering, too, that it is also mentioned that Fenrir has a mouth that can reach all of creation and all of heaven in one bite. And so the idea of the products of chaos taking the sun and the moon down as being just as much perhaps a connection to Fenrir. I don't honestly know, but this is why there is that confusion. Like, you might hear people say, oh no, it's Fenrir that swallows the sun and the moon. And then other might say, no, it's Skjold and Hati. And that's because of this. And it could be simply a changing or a misinterpretation, or a need to create the verse to fit. And that has created some great confusion. The good news is it's pretty blatant. And so, I've always taken it to be that Skjold and Hati are themselves, but much akin to the source of, or sourced from Fenrir, like children, if you will. I don't consider them perhaps like, again, hypostases, if you will. So Vafþrúðnir speaks, and then bears a title from the elves of the sun. 47. A daughter bright, Alfroðul bears, ere Fenrir snatches her forth. Her mother's path shall be the maiden's tread when the gods to death have gone. And the word Alfroðul is the name in relation to the sun. It is the sun to the elves. And it is another Haiti of them. So you'll see it too, like in Alvismal. What is the name of the sun to the gods? What is the name of the sun to the elves? What is the name of the sun to mankind, to the Dvergar, and so on and so forth? And that is, again, another reference to it. So bearing her forth, she has and will take her mother's rightful path. But it is quite interesting that the mentioning that soul, as we referred to before, and then afterwards the name is not specified. Just says her mother's path. So in 48, much have I fared, much have I found, much have I got from the gods. What maidens are they so wise of mind that forth over the sea shall fare? This is, of course, lending into yes, this is an interesting one. The translation argument here on the next stanza. So the reference to exactly who the maidens are is up to speculation. Many people believe it to be the Nornir or the Norns. It's interesting because I right now I'm going to look it up as soon as I'm able to, because it's the word Mog that I know is Thrasir or Thrasis is, of course, the will to, like Leif Thrasir is the will to, or the desire, greatly desirous to live. Vafþrúðnir spake over Mogthrosur's hill. And again, this in reference to perhaps either the well of Erd or Mimir's well. The shall the maidens pass, and 3 are their throngs that come, that all shall protect the dwellers on earth, that they come of the giant's kin. So again, that reference to the giant's kin makes, again, more of a lending towards the Nornir. And Mogthras's Hill again is in reference to, or at least some people speculate it is, in reference to the well of Mimir. And I had this whole thing too. I just remembered about this, and it is like written down, and I did not break it out for this. I didn't even think we were going to get this far. The other conclusion of this, though, is that these are the waters that recede the flames. That is another speculation about this, and why it's spoken of the maidens going over the ocean or over the sea, is that this is where fate turns and the waters are brought forth to recede the flames of Surtur, to wash the damage that has come. Yes, Morgus is like sun, desirous of sons, or desirous of sons. Now, that's yes. So Mogthras's Hill is, in my opinion, and this is, I just remembered it all. It's all just clicked. Is the earth. Mogthras's Hill is the earth, and Mogthrasir is humanity. The desirer of sons is the folk. That the desirers of the son of sons is the folk themselves, and they shall over the Mogthras's Hill is the middle world, and over them shall pass, and there in throngs they will come, and they shall protect the generations of the folk, and they come from the giant kin, of course, re-emphasizing that this is the Nornir and their turn of fate. I know that a lot of people have taken this to mean Mimir. Some have even taken it to mean Heimdall. But I have always taken this to be a Haiti for the earth, because the desirer of sons is mankind, or the folk themselves. But that is a great one to definitely look into. In return, in 50, Odin spake, much have I fared, much have I found, much have I got of the gods. Who then shall rule the realm of the gods when the fires of Surt have sunk? And that's, again, another reason why I bring up the point that when we talk about the waves of the maidens that pass over the earth of humanity, they douse the flames, is because this stanza that follows. So it's like, well, then who shall rule after these waves have, returned the fate of man, and the flames of Ragnarok are subsided. And that brings us into the last set of stanzas. We did the whole thing, and it's only 11:38. That's, or on my time. That's great. Okay, so Vafþrúðnir speaks now into the future, which is an interesting point, because again, it was kind of highlighted that the Volva, or the Vala of the Volaspau, was the one who knew the most of this. But this is, again, the knowledge of the deep wise ones. So this is really pinnacling into how wise Vafþrúðnir is. And he says, in the home of the gods, Vidar and Valli shall dwell. When the fires of Surt have sunk, Magni and Mothi and Magni shall Mjolnir have when Vingnir falls in fight. So, taking up in the halls of the gods, we have, again, the hierarchy is being established with Vidar and Vauli, Baldur and Nanna, Magni and Mothi. When their father falls, they shall pick up the hammer. And I think that's also an interesting point. I have always taken it that, I don't know to perhaps which, but I've always taken it that there's often a forgotten weapon of Thor, the iron rod, Gridavol. And Gridavol is the weapon wielded before the hammer, and that, one would take one and one would take the other, and thus refilling in the great space and the vacuum of the Stormfather. And that's, again, why at Thor's Hof you will see Gríðarvöll inside the strength belt of Lord Thor.
So, in the meantime, Finn Wraith donated €10. I was going to donate last week since the stream was a few days before my birthday, but fell asleep and did it. So now I'm doing it. Well, thank you very much and happy birthday. We appreciate all you guys who donate, and especially all you guys that are here every week, that participate in the chat, that ask questions, that have, many of you have been with us for episode 92. So it's a long while now. Appreciate you guys. I'm being quiet tonight, but I'm listening to Svan and I'm listening to the story, and I don't think a lot of this is baffling. The lore retells a lot of these things a number of times, but there's fun little details or poetic ways these things are placed in here that I think is special. And I think this particular, talking about Ragnarok and the aftermath towards the end here, is really special imagery to me, especially with Odin himself being asking these questions of the giant in the hall about cataclysmic things that happened to him in the Aesir. It's really interesting, and I'm glad we're going through, because I don't want the narrative to get lost of the story. But I think it's neat that we're getting all the way through this tonight, because I think it tells the story completely and digestible.
Well, and one thing I didn't want to get lost in the weeds about it, but it's like I've always kind of taken certain, like the messaging of Gríðarvöll and Mjolnir and those correlations to each other, where we have lore, but the lore is in verse, and verse sometimes doesn't allow to fill in the sinew between the muscles. And again, perceiving lore in a spiritual way, but also perceiving lore as a storyteller is a thing that I have a tendency to do. And I think one thing, like that correlation of seeing, I wanted to place Gríðarvöll on Lord Thor's belt because of the forgottenness of that lore that so many people just gloss over. And so that we could kind of, again, expound on that, leave these Easter eggs to kind of hide. On the cauldron at Njord's there is the pledge that Njord gives to the gods on the actual cauldron on the outside, and it shows that pledge. So a lot of these little things come straight from the lore, but to expounding on them, like with Mothi or Moður being like wrathful, and the Gríðarvöll being, Gríða is like resistance or aggro, just aggravation and conflict. I've always kind of aligned the image of Gríðarvöll in Mothi's hands, whereas the mighty hand Magni would hold Mjolnir, and but that's not stated in the lore. It just isn't, but there's kind of this sinuous sense. So I want people to take that into consideration, that a lot of that too is me really kind of, I don't know, trying to breathe life back into the story, or lead down lines of thought. But I'm not with the attempt of trying to, make things up. So I don't want people to get that in misconstrued. And I think that comes from me being a storyteller. And I think the prose are seeds, kernels, but each of the verses and each of the poems themselves have a lot to grow on, and they have the trajectory of their growth kind of set. But I don't know where I was going with that one.
I think you were stanza 52.
Okay. Yes. Then Odin speaks, 52. Much have I fared, much have I found, much have I got of the gods. What shall bring the doom, the death of Odin, when the gods of destruction go? The gods to destruction go. And Vafþrúðnir knows that fate, the fate of the wolf. The wolf shall fell the father of men. And this shall Vidar's avenge. The terrible jaws shall he tear apart, and so the wolf shall he slay. The return of the Axis Mundi in the very mouth of chaos. The boot of Lord Vidar is, of course, the foundational, and his verticalness of ripping the wolf's jaws asunder, again creating the axis power of the gods, creating order and chaos, and the unmoving central hub. This is the full fulfillment of the karma of the gods and the Jotuns, and Dharma is realigned. It's taken this long, and this is the long turning one that eventually bears to fruition. It's just interesting. I've always taken, I just thought it was an interesting thing, again, because there is writings and leanings towards the audience knowing certain things, but there is no, the mention of Fenris is not utilized in the stanza. The word Ulfur is. And I always thought that was very strange. And I don't mean anything behind that. It's just, again, it kind of shows that the usage of words in relation to perhaps not wanting to be repetitive with stanzas from before, or there's no reasonings that we might even know. It's just that the word, the Ulfur gleipa mun Alfader, instead of Fenris or what have you. So the dweller of the fens. But this is the final finale, because this is the acceptable. But now the game is over, and this is the proverbial bomb that I was referring to. And I think this is kind of a wink, like who, that Lord Odin is saying to the weaving riddle maker, how does Lord Odin die? And he says it, and then he says, and then this is the final bomb that's like, I am he. In 54, Odin speaks, much have I fared, much have I found, much have I got from the gods. And this is the bomb. What spake Odin himself in the ears of his son, ere in the bale fire he burned? So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. What was spoken by Odin, to his son in the bale pyre. And that's kind of the hard stop. And I think poetically it's very fitting. And of course it's lending to other parts of the lore so that the poet can, gain this, but it is absolutely that hard stop. And I've always kind of, whenever I tell this story, this is the part where Vafþrúðnir, is speaking in delight about the death of the Allfather. And he's like kind of haughty and laughing about it. And then Gangreður says, okay, well, what did he say in his ear, in Baldur's ear? And that's when, because the premise of all of these questions is that you as a questioner should know the answer as well. And that's the big bomb. Because throughout this entire exchange, if you ask the question, you have to know the answer. So if you ask a question like this, there's only one way you can know the answer. And that's what Vafþrúðnir says in 55. No man can tell what in olden time thou spakest in the ears of thy son. With fated mouth the fall of the gods, and mine olden tales have I told. With Odin in knowledge now I am striven, and ever the wiser thou art. And that kind of ends it. That's the, the conclusion. Of course, the playing on the head, or the playing for the head, is never emphasized after. It's never saying that, Lord Odin took his head. It's implied and clearly in the story. And I don't know why I keep kind of harping on the idea that it was kind of interpolated in there, but despite that, the end is still, nobody knows the answer to that except for the person that just asked the question. And that is you, Lord Odin. And I have battled wits with you, and you are still the wiser. And that is Vafþrúðnismál.
Well done. I love the ending to that. I think it's extremely powerful. We see this a number of times in our lore, but the idea of Odin showing up in disguise, and people, I say people, I guess people counts, persons, beings, being I guess there's a truth to it that cuts on how you act when you, like, everyone would act a certain way in the presence of the Allfather, in the presence of the King of the Aesir in all of his glory. You would behave a certain way. Judging that behavior on, how you'd interact when you don't think anyone's looking, or when you think you have the upper hand, and then the big reveal of who you've been talking to, I think speaks to us on a really fundamental level of the truth of who we are versus who we say we are. And I think that's really, beautifully brought out in some of these things. But I really like this poem. I like how it develops in the questioning, and especially the ending. But I'm glad we were able to kind of get it in one chunk tonight. I think that's good, and I like that we do that. There's others that will take longer on, but I think this one is relatively straightforward. But the way it puts certain things poetically, I think, is really beautiful, and we kind of harken back to at different times. So getting to questions this evening, I'd like to answer the question from Michael from Njordshof. Als her je gothi flavel, what is the protocol for the folk without that would like to come to the Hof to see what it's like? We have two good friends that show enough interest to attend a service. Both are learned in the lore, but yet worship Christian ways. Well, hopefully we fix that. So a couple of things, just so folks know. If you would like to attend an event that's happening in your area, if you'd like to attend one of our Hofs, please let your local folk builder know And we do like to get your name and, and your birthday so we can do a quick check. And most importantly, make sure that it's safe for you to be around kids. It's sad that we have to do that. Please, nobody think that our system is foolproof. It's not, but we do like to run the names, to just see if you're on the sex offender registry. Hopefully you're not. So we know that that's a good thing or not. And there's going to be people that happen by the Hoffs and just show up, and we're happy to entertain that on a case by case basis. But when we know ahead of time, that's the protocol. Michael, is just get their names and a date of birth and let somebody know, and we can run a quick check and make sure everything's on the up and up, and folks are safe. And we'd like to have guests that are, our folk that are maybe confused or, might be open to considering what we do, or at least be respectful of it and take a look at it and see and understand better what you do and how you worship. So I think that'd be a nice thing, and I'm glad that you guys got folks that you want to bring by. With that, we're going to decide what we're going to do next week, because we're going to give Svan a break between major pieces of our lore. And then what is next for us? The Grimnismal, I believe, 2 weeks from today.
Great.
So, 2 weeks from today, we will start on the Grimnismal. You did all the heavy lifting tonight, Svan, so we appreciate that. It's interesting because when Svan gets on a roll on some of these things, especially if it involves any kind of storytelling, everything around gets really quiet, because I think we all enjoy listening to Svan tell a story or really go in some of this when he's in his full Gothic glory on it. And it was really nice to listen to that tonight. Like I said, I really enjoy this poem, and I'm glad we're able to go on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I've been grinding away at between work and property management, and this was just so fun to just be able to sit down and talk about the gods, talk about the lore, and just spend some time with you and spend some time with the audience. This is good. I needed this.
Well, I'm glad, and hopefully it was good for our audience. I always look forward to talking to you guys, and we'll talk to you again. I will talk to you again next week, and like I say, 2 weeks from now, we will bite off the next chunk of the Edda. Until then, hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember that victory never sleeps.
Good night, everyone.